Hello and welcome to Love Your Job, Love Your Life podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Bev Markland today. Welcome to the podcast, Bev.
Good afternoon and a hello on a Friday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we are, Bev is the Chief People Officer at a company called Agilitas. Agilitas are a channel business in the IT solutions world. And through conversations that we've been having, we've decided to do this podcast around and I'm going to call it the younger generation and that transition of the younger generation into the workplace. And you know, there's been a lot of articles about this, and there's a lot of press about it. And the reason behind that is quite simple because unemployment at the moment within the age category of 16 to 24 is seems to be steadily increasing year on year. And just last year it was up at 14.5%. What does that actually equate to? Because percentages are always interesting, aren't they? But that means that there are what they classify as economically inactive. That means that they're out of school, they're out of work. And that equates to 3 million people in the UK between the ages of 16 and 24 that are economically inactive, which is actually, when you think about it, it's quite a frightening figure. So one of the things that we're talking about today is, why is that the case? Why is it that the younger generation, Gen Zs as they are struggling to get into the workplace, and what more can we do about that? So that's our discussion topic today. So it should be a really interesting conversation. This is a topic, and Bev, you probably see it as well. I go to a lot of networking events and I talk to lots of HR professionals. And this is one of the hot topics on people's lips at the moment.
It is,
Um,
very much so.
and I don't necessarily think there's a straight answer for it, but we'll have some discussion around it. So let's start with a very broad question for you, Bev, on this one. I've just given some stats there around the younger generation and Gen Z struggling to get into the workplace, and the levels of inactivity in the workplace. Why do you see there being so many challenges in the market for the younger generation that are often struggling to get into the workforce?
I think I'd start off with the pandemic. Post-pandemic, a lot of kids and young people were affected. Schools were out for a period of time. University operated in a very, very different way. And from what I can remember, watching the news and reading articles, there were more and more young people struggling to, one, both study, but also that mental health was impacted. I think what then happened as a result of that, and of course, we're all in isolation and remember what was happening 5 years ago, young people, I think, started to feel excluded from society. They were no longer socializing, whether with their peers. They weren't applying for roles at that time, whether it be Saturday jobs or not, to broaden their experience. And all of their communication was taking place online. So I think very much we have now an absence of being able to communicate effectively, but also young people not having had perhaps some of the insights that we might have had in our last year at school of understanding what kind of a future they could have ahead of them, whether that was academic, whether that's apprenticeships. I heard this week alone, we're just not making enough use of the apprenticeship scheme. A lot of our young people, I think, are influenced by social media. Thinking about my own grandchildren saying, what would you want to be? They want to be influencers. So we're not seeing young people apply for what we call a normal role. And I guess in some ways, what I see as a recruiter is they then don't have the patience or the desire to stick around in a role longer time. So as soon as perhaps something challenging happens, or they're not getting the value and appreciation, which is really important to Gen Zs, off they go. And they don't always leave a job, I've found, to go into another role, which used to be the general rule of thumb. And they don't seem to be, and I'm going to use the word bothered, and perhaps that's not the best word, about a CV which doesn't give a straight correlation of what somebody's been doing for the past couple of years. So we really are in a very, very stuck position, because I think whilst they're economically inactive, they're also inactive in building all aspects of their life. So they're living at home longer. Parents are, I think, much more generous than what we used to be, because we understand why they're in the position they are. And I think, again, at the forefront, I talk about this a lot, James, mental health. We've got more and more people who are unfortunately and sadly living with a variety of poor mental health. We've got a growing neurodiverse society, and we're not able to keep up with the demands and challenges and understanding what that means, whether that be as an employer and for the young person. They're perhaps, they are vulnerable. They don't know what to do yet.
Yeah.
It's really hard, because if you think 16 to 24 and they're now inactive, at what stage does either an employer, and this is perhaps a bit political, an employer or we say, okay, what are we going to do to help and support these young people? Because if they do
Yeah.
get into work, how do they then have a decent life ahead of them? Because
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
that's what you want them to have.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting comments in there. So, actually, you raised the COVID point there, and I always try and avoid COVID conversations because
Right.
because
I know.
everyone was talking about it for many years, but actually we forget. We're 5 years on from that now, from when it 5 years ago today we were firmly in lockdown. And we forget about the impact that had on our younger generation. And for many years, in the workplace, we talk about resilience, we talk about progression, we talk about planning, we talk about all these things, and we forget the impact that it actually had, because it knocked confidence, it knocked resilience. And we may talk about this later on in the podcast, but things like anxiety and this fear that came out. And we know that the younger generation often are like sponges, and they take on so much information, and yet in that environment there was this fear factor of, you can't go outside, you can't integrate. And then when they go, oh, tomorrow you can. Hang on a minute, you've just been telling us for the last 7 months that we can't. Now tomorrow you want us all to return to school. Psychologically, that must have had a huge impact on. And I don't know if there's any research that's been done on it, but it's something that certainly you raise, and it's worth exploring further, probably. But and the mental health. I'm a huge advocate of men's mental health, Bev. And the fastest growing age category in men's mental health is the 16 to 24-year-olds. So it's that transition from, dare I say, boyhood to manhood, and they're really struggling to make that transition, which is why it's the biggest issue. And so we could probably talk about these things for hours and days.
There is so much debate around it. And of course, we've all been watching and looking on LinkedIn, watching the recent Netflix show Adolescence, which really was poignant and meaningful. And I think when you think about that show, there will be individuals who are living that life and that insecurity. And as I said before, as parents, we want all the best. And we had a great discussion the other week about the absence of things like youth clubs, for example. So young people don't now go off and forge relationships in the same way. Work experience schemes have almost stopped. So young people don't get exposure to work in the same way. And there's now so much to choose from. So, I'm going to show my age now. Back in the day, there was probably 5 or 6 jobs that you could choose from. And off you went to do one of those, potentially for the rest of your life. But what Gen Z I think they also have is they have different desires to us. and we don't yet
Yeah.
understand them. So they come with a lot of stereotypes around people believing them to be entitled or privileged, and they want
Yeah.
everything. And in fact, there was a great article this week about, Gen Zs really want to be valued, but they want to be valued financially. And I think we saw in the pandemic, certainly sort of post-university salaries really shooting up, which
Yeah.
is fantastic for one spectrum of the community or society. But those coming straight out of schools are really struggling in national
Yeah.
minimum wage roles.
Yeah.
So we know that small businesses have really been impacted. So they are more likely to recruit young people with no experience at a reduced salary and can't offer realistically a career path. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
absence of careers path, the absence of mental health support, the absence of soft skills training and coaching for individuals, which comes through college or university or other means in the workplace, they all seem to be disappearing. So
Yeah.
resources for young people are heavily impacted, but the ask around them is growing. And we're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
in tandem, are we? We're not aligned at all
No.
in that.
And also with the cost of university, and let's not go down that rabbit hole, but the cost of university, more and more of the younger generation at the age of 18, and I was probably one of the last years, I think, and that's quite scary when I think about how long ago I went to university, one of the last years where before people had to actually start paying the fees. But the cost of going to university is also putting people off, which is probably also impacting why there is so much economic inactivity, because you've got a greater proportion of greater proportion of younger adults at the age of 18 that are trying to get these roles. So look, as I say, the big why bit and all of that, we could talk about it probably quite a long time. But if we now kind of break that down and say, look, we've talked about a lot of issues there, Bev. I suppose the next question really is, we can see there's a problem, we can understand, and we know there's a problem. How can we, and I say we, the royal we, how can we as people that are working in corporate organizations, how can we start supporting the younger generation that are coming through to reduce this level of unemployment? And also, we touched on it, and it's a big topic. But how can we also support them in kind of the reduction of maybe mental health issues as well? Because I think the two are probably intertwined, especially when we think that mental health issues has an impact on confidence. I've had issues in the past, and I talk quite openly about it. And when I had issues, my confidence was at an all-time low. So I had to really put my used to pull out my drama GCSE, I say sometimes, and put my mask on to go to an interview to show people how good I am. It's not strictly true, Bev, but how can we support them? Because it really is something that we need to address, and address quickly.
I think we are, and I know we're talking about 16 to 24-year-olds, but I think we've got to go further than that. We've got an issue now. So if we understand we've got a problem now, let's go into schools from an earlier age. Let's start to educate children more around well-being, and what that really means for them. And we're already starting to see, the old adage of boys don't cry, it's disappeared, thankfully, because
Yeah,
boys can cry. Why shouldn't they
yeah,
be upset? But also we can, I think, from the age of 11, which is when a young person really starts to identify with themselves in school terms, the soft skills coaching. How do you have a great conversation? Because they're all pinging on a phone. So how do you
mm-hmm.
actually talk to somebody? We're also going to have to factor on with what the world of AI means, because that's really going to influence. It's already doing it now, but it's going to do it more. And then we need to start to think about what roles are going to be around in 10 years' time because of automation, or because we're living so differently. I think back, and I think, being 16, going off to work in a variety of different roles, including interviewing salespeople. You would never do that in this day and age. One, because your parents wouldn't think you were safe. And two, you've not had that exposure to being able to have that kind of a conversation. So how can we help young people do that? We've got a great apprenticeship scheme, but actually, is there something we can do at a younger age? So is there a mini apprenticeship opportunity out there, particularly where some children say, I don't want to be academic. So actually, this is perhaps going back to the traditional way of life. Age of 14, you start to learn a trade because that's where your vocation is. That's where you know that you're really passionate.
Yeah, yeah.
We can then,
And that's a really valid point, Bev, because you know I know my both my kids. Do they enjoy school? No. How many kids enjoy school? Not many kids enjoy school, but certainly my son, who's now 17, had there been some kind of vocational avenue to go down rather than the traditional, you come to school, you do your 9 GCSEs, you sit in classrooms all day. He probably would have flourished in that kind of vocational avenue. Instead, it was a battle to get him through school and get him to school sometimes, but because he just wasn't interested. And in academia, let's call it academia, isn't for everyone. I didn't really. I went to university, um, but I can't say that I really enjoyed. I didn't enjoy school at all. I just did it because I kind of had to, and I ended up going to university because it looked like good fun option to me.
and and I think that's right. And I also, I've met obviously through recruitment a lot of young people, and they report really poor experiences with school that have impacted onto how they feel about themselves and self-esteem. So I think that there is, and we know that teachers are struggling, and we know it's under resourced. So I'm not teacher picking at all, just to be clear, but giving them some support and guidance to help young people. Um, if I think about university, a friend of mine at age 40 has just paid off her student loan at 40 and has always worked. So actually, when you think about the cost of living crisis and young people being able not only to embark on education, but also to live independently, all of that stifles them in terms of them making career choices. And I'm going to put some ownership onto employers. We don't put on a job spec anymore 3 years experience, but we regularly assess experience rather than,
Mm-hmm.
for example, thinking about how we can grow and develop a person. And some of the work that we've been doing at Agilitas, because, we all have a duty and a responsibility to do what we can. So we support organisations such as the Early Careers Foundation, where some of our employees spend just an hour a month online supporting young people. We're just embarking on a new CSR program with a school for a rolling 8-week program, which will help a student understand their strengths, how to present themselves, communication, write a CV, for example. And there are some great initiatives out there that companies can really get involved with at whatever level. We're just a small business of 81. But, I kind of think if we can do it, everybody can do it. There are also some great agencies out there, and I've been speaking to one this week, and they help not only Gen Z, but vulnerable people into work.
Right. No.
We need to do more around that as well. But the charitable arm of life, again, doesn't seem to be aligned with our current financial position because of all of the extra demands that are being placed on businesses. And this is where in 10 years' time, if we don't start to change and leverage what we do now and think about the future, unfortunately, those 16 to 24-year-olds will be 35 and we'll have a new cohort of 16 to 24s.
Yeah, yeah.
It's doing as much as you can. It's going back to basics. It's introducing work experience if you can. It's spending time with young people and it's giving them a chance. And in the same way that we have again in our business, is supporting them through an apprenticeship program, which means they haven't got to stay with you forever if they don't want to, and they can start to make some really good choices for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to somebody earlier, actually, we were talking about a similar thing that said, it's about it's about supporting people and helping people to transition as well, because it's a you know it's a big step. And I think back to when I was at school, or I think back to my kids, and they go to school and they think that, as much as they say, oh, it's a long day, in the world of work, it's not really a long day. You get your 15-minute break and your 45-minute lunch and your 15-minute break in the afternoon, and then they go into work, and it's kind of, even if you took the 9 to 5:30, even that in itself is probably the best part of 2 hours longer, and they're struggling to transition from the academic life of school into work, and understand what that actually means as well, which can be quite challenging in itself.
We definitely see that, and work-life balance, flexibility, being able to work from home, working on a hybrid model is something that almost everybody wants, not just young people, but
Yeah,
young
yeah.
people in particular really value that. The questions that they're always interested to understand is, what's your culture like? So
Hmm.
whereas before the first question might be, how much are you going to pay me? It's now, what's your culture like? How are you going to support me? How are you going to look after me? And we've seen a rise, haven't we, in family friendly policies that promote that. So the fact that we now, as a right, we have flexible working from day one, I think is indicative of what you're saying, that people don't want to go, we'll always work in a straight 9 to 5, again, for a variety of reasons, and that employers are now being, held to account to say not everybody should be expected to work in the same way or work the same hours. And again, we will see more of that coming through. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
the newest legislation that they're not going to introduce at the moment is the right to switch off.
yeah. It's a difficult one, that one, isn't it? To
Very.
police and to come up with the right wording to kind of embed it into an organization. But I want to come back to you on some of the things that you're doing,
Mm.
Bev, with Agilitas. You mentioned a few already, but I want to just come back and touch on that in a second. But the other thing that I wanted to also mention, and clearly Agilitas doesn't sound like you're doing this, but often what I've seen, and with conversations that I've had, there is often in organizations, there is this tick box, and I'm going to call it a tick box exercise. Oh, we do that,
Yeah.
but, and we can go tick, but we don't but when you get under the skin of it, they don't really do it. And I think it's lovely to hear you saying, how can organizations help this group of people? Well, they've got to, and I'm going to be controversial and blunt with this statement, they need to step up to the plate, and they need to actually go, do you know what? We need to do more of this. We need to find the time. And, when I was at Capita, as an example, in my last kind of big corporate role, we did the same thing from a work experience perspective. We actually had underprivileged children from schools coming in for a week, and we'd give them some of the stuff that you've talked about around presenting and asking questions and socializing, and bringing people in from the organization to talk about what they do, and then kind of integrating and helping them to understand kind of what this thing called work actually is. But it became challenging, and I'll be honest with you, it became challenging because there was a lot of, and I'm going to say, red tape that we needed to go through to enable us to make that happen. Um, but we clearly, at Capita, we supported it, and we made it happen. But that's something that I think organisations really do need to step up and maybe think about how they can do it more effectively,
I
because
think
it's so powerful.
Yeah, and I think that the schools actually, and the red tape, from what I can see, is now reducing, because the schools are recognising um, that their young people really do need more, and they genuinely care about them, and they want them to go on and do good things after school. I think that some years ago, we all got lost in doing really great things in CSR, and we wanted to be fantastic. We then started to talk about DEI an awful lot. Um, And that always used to make me smile because it didn't mean that someone was actually doing anything. They just spoke about it really well. I think the challenges for me are not just the red tape, but also people committing their time. And we know, again, if we start off, with what we said at the beginning, we've now got several generations in the workforce. We've got an aging population who are still in work. Um, I'm in denial that I'm one of them, by the way. And they don't have the same time or sometimes energy. And dare I say it, perhaps we're a little bit more selfish in protecting ourselves from what we used
Yeah,
to be.
possibly.
And
Yeah,
those are the things that have got to give and change. And we in any business can create a program, but it can only work if one, our employees engage in it, which I hope that they will. And also the organisations we work with, as you say, don't have so much red tape that at the end of it, you're not left with something that's very meaningful.
yeah, yeah. And often, I talk about engagement and clearly quite a lot. That's the foundation of engage to succeed. And people often ask me around how do you engage the different generations of people in an organization? Because when you've got five generations, everyone was brought up and grew up in a slightly different era, hence the five generations. Um, but when you actually start asking those really simple but pertinent questions around, you know, even if you took the older age category, why are you still in work? What are you offering us? They have so much to offer, and so much information and knowledge and experience that can help. And the younger generation coming through, and it's about matching up and making sure that as an organization you are utilizing the skills and the experience of everyone you've got in the business, because everybody has something to give. Secondly, we categorize and go, oh well, Gen Zs, they don't like to work, they like to watch videos, which is, again, I'm going to say it's rubbish. There's a lot of Gen Zs out there that have the same kind of career aspiration as I had, or probably you had when we were their age. So there are stereotypical views on the generations which aren't always right, and that's what I also want to make sure that, just because they're Gen Z doesn't mean they're fundamentally different to other people in the business. They are still a human being, and they still have a lot of skills to offer. My son teaches me all sorts of stuff from a technology perspective, as an example, which puts me to shame. But
Yeah. And I think they're more straightforward. I think
yeah,
that
yeah,
they are more empowered in their voice. They believe that they have an opinion that they can share, and we see and we hear that, which means they come with a lot of ideas and innovation if you put them into the right role and also the right mentor. And one of the things I've just said on an email just before I joined this podcast was about our school program. It doesn't matter what your role is, we can all be a mentor to someone. We're all a role model to somebody else for whatever reason. And it's not about job title. You asked me at the beginning, how did I want to be introduced? The job title really doesn't mean anything. I think that you need individuals in a business who want to create success and progress around them. I think that if we ignore what any generation wants from work, a business is not going to be able to either attract people or also retain them.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's our duty and responsibility to find out what that looks like and start to create it. It's almost easier in a small business because you've got less people. Um, then there are challenges that go around that. But for example, this week we've been talking about community groups. So we've got a fantastic CEO. And someone said to me some time ago, we haven't really got any community groups here, have we? And I said, no, it's been hard to do to get people to engage. So last month we met as a group of carers because we have a few in our business. The wellbeing group has been formed and is going to do some great stuff. And then we came up with this week, Nature's Nurturers, which
nice.
I know I've quite fancy that. And it's as simple as going out into our grounds, and we're going to make it look lovely and neat and do some planting. And if you feel as if your head's about to burst, there's something you can go and do, which is cathartic. And
Yeah, I
there
like that.
were so many people who went, I really like the idea of that. Um, there, there are lots of ways to be creative. And I am fortunate enough to work with some fantastic people who say, go off and be creative. Um, I think we can do some great things with Gen Zs. We've got a number of Gen Zs in our business. Some have been promoted already. We have 4 to 6 of them on an apprenticeship program, and they thoroughly enjoy us and our culture. And I hope that they become then role models to other people who come into our business to say, this is what you can do, this is what you can achieve. Because quite often, self esteem and self confidence and belief are the blockers that we find in younger people because they feel being knocked back because of a lack of experience or those are the stereotypes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked quite a lot about what you've been doing at Agilitas, which is brilliant, Bev, and that nature one is brilliant. We talk about. I talk to lots of people about if your day's not going well, get up, walk outside, go and get some fresh air, some sunlight, go for a walk. You don't have to go and run a marathon or a half marathon. It's just about, as we were talking about, the cycle to work scheme and how we both love to cycle.
Absolutely.
That when you get to, I used to cycle to work when I used to actually go to an office, but um, when you get there, you're ready for the day because you've had some exercise, you've had some fresh air, you've had some sunlight. Not always, because this is the UK after all, but it's a really powerful thing to do. So we've talked a lot about what you're doing. I guess kind of a final question before we sort of bring this to a close is we know the younger generation. We've talked about the struggles they have, and we've talked about how we can help them. But is there, and we even talked about actually, do we need to think about the educational system differently? That's a whole nother topic, which I'm not sure I'm brave enough to go into that in detail. But do we need to think differently about the transition process? Because as you rightly say, the younger generation, they've hit with COVID, they maybe don't have the confidence, they've probably got a bit of anxiety. We still, and I've worked in recruitment for 21 years, we still stick to the same process. And even my son is interviewing at the moment for jobs, and the process is still the same he's going through as I went through when I was 16. So do we need to think differently about that transition process, either how to get a job, but also that transition from education to work? Because as you rightly said, school don't teach the kids any of this.
I think we definitely need to reconsider the process. And I think that starts in school. I think as you approach your final year, again, I don't know if it still happens, but that whole career guidance and advice, being more meaningful than what it used to be. And then I think if we were to say, and again, it might sound controversial, how about as we have done with other underrepresented groups, we say that each business recruits a percentage of individuals who will be between 16 and 18 or 20, whatever the age, who you then support with through an apprenticeship. Um, and then, we've seen the police, for example, do things like that. We've seen larger organisations who say we support vulnerable people and we'll recruit 20% of our people because they might be, I don't know, I won't mention shops, the retirement age. They're still really great employees. So actually, that's where our focus is going to be. And I think we need to do more around understanding not just the well-being place. And I'm really mindful of always talking about mental health, but I know that it's a subject that we often discuss, particularly when talking about Gen Z. So how do we build people up from a younger age to understand what resilience is and then
Mm-hmm.
help them navigate their challenges? And that's me being very careful with the wording. And I think that organizations, and particularly larger organizations, really have an opportunity to open up their recruitment processes to do things like the work experience or the placement programs. And I'm going to be controversial in terms of going back to education. Let's rethink university fees. Because
Yeah,
if you were to go to university or something like-minded for 3 years, and you have that great social setting, whether or not you get a good degree or not isn't always the best outcome. It's actually the fact that you've grown confidence and you've been living away from home and you understand yourself a lot more. I think the majority of people who, for example, might do an English university degree won't be an English teacher or do something, but they have a transferable skill and skills to be able to go and do something else. And I think we need to talk about transferable skills a lot more.
yeah. No, I totally agree.
Oh,
You know, I did geography and geology, and I became a recruiter. So, you know, go figure that one out. I
right.
suppose you could say I knew where places were, so that meant I wasn't wasting time. But no,
You can say that.
but you know, it's true. It. You know, there was when I went, there was a lot of people that went for that social
Yeah.
skills element of, you know, living away from home, having your independence, managing your time, all those great things. So yeah. Look, Bev, this has been we could probably talk for hours on this topic, and we could probably go round and round in circles, and before we know it, it'll be Monday morning, I think. Um, but what I'd like to do is just you know, there's been some really insightful stuff here. I always like to finish with any hints, tips, closing remarks, thoughts that you might have for other organizations. I think we've covered a lot. And, you know, you've just said there, you know, maybe look at work experience, look at how we can help younger generations going into schools and offering up free mentoring or free opportunities to talk to them. There's a whole host of stuff. If you had to kind of pick the top two, what would they be?
I think as we've been talking, and it's something that perhaps I haven't done as much of, is actually connect with the younger people in your business now in order to understand what their journey has been, because they know it far better than you and I. So how have they got to be an employee somewhere? And what would they have wanted in terms of support in order to now be where they currently are? And then I think I would absolutely advocate getting involved in schemes like the Early Careers Foundation and giving your time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that might just be a great starting point to try and effect some positive change.
yeah. And maybe we can put the link to that organization website in the comments. So if anyone is interested in exploring that, we'll put the link, the website link in the comments so they can just quickly find it. Bev, this has been it's been a great conversation, and I love those closing remarks because it's kind of music to my ears because I talk about from an engagement perspective. I always say that engagement is driven by the individual, and the only way that you can truly understand how to engage your employees is to ask them that question, which
Absolutely.
is exactly what you've just said, which is so true. Because, you know, often it's asking those simple questions and getting their viewpoint rather than what you think their viewpoint is that enables you to change things and become much more effective. So I love those two bits of information.
I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Good. Bev, thank you very much for joining. Final one, and I guess it's probably the same as the website. Um, I always say to people, if anyone wants to pick up with you independently, having watched this, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more than happy
So,
to connect with anybody.
all right. So I will also put your LinkedIn profile in the comments below, so people can. It's easy for them to connect in with you. So, Bev, look, thank you very much for joining. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for your insights.
Thanks so much, James. Good to talk to you.
Cheers.